in the theme of Experience Makers newsletters, Conversations with Renee, as part of the 25-year celebration with Experience Makers, I'm sitting with Reneé de Waal, the founder and chief visionary of Experience Makers, to just speak about some of the kind of topics and ethoses that are kind of ingrained in yourself and your business. So we'll jump right in.
Yes, and I want to say thank you, because I can't think of a better person to have this interview with, because you've been part of Experience Makers for the last 18 years and you understand the intrinsic language of the brand and the processes of thinking, and you've been as much a part of giving birth to a lot of this. So thank you for having this interview with me.
It's a pleasure. You've been meditating for about 30 years, and you've started your, well, Experience Makers is now 25 years old, but you've been in the industry for about 30 years. Is that timing a coincidence, that 30-year mark?
I started the business 25 years ago, and I think at a very early stage, I recognized that I needed something to ground me. And at that stage, meditation was seen as something odd, and some people would have even seen it as evil. I always had an intrinsic calling to that world, but meditation for me lived here, and my business world lived there. And I used the meditation as a coping tool for my business and operating in the realm of work. And it's taken me probably the better part of the 25 years. So I started the career about 30 years ago, started my business 25 years ago, and it was within the first 2 years of my business that this tool found me. It was a complete coincidence, but I immediately had a sense that this is what I needed to do. And I don't know if it's a coincidence or not. I can say 30 years on in this industry, 25 years on in this business that I started, it was a divine intervention of my in my own intuition to have known that this is what I needed to do. And it's taken me basically 25 years to realize that this and this is actually supposed to coexist like this.
Yeah, because there's a lot of parallels between meditation and if you actually are doing the creation of interiors in a mindful way. So if you have to look at intention setting or intentionality in meditation and in mindful spaces, how do you go about that in creating the desired experience?
Well, fast forward the movie 30 years or 25 years on in terms of my advanced techniques that I've done in meditation, and having advanced myself in the career of interior architecture and design, they both are transformative. The one is an inner transformation. So with the technique that I do, which is transcendental meditation, you don't go into it with an intention to empty your mind. You go into it with a mantra, and the mantra in and of itself does the work. And I think within my career, there's an unconscious competence that kicks in that also does the work in and of itself. And where in meditation, the reward is the emptying out of the vessel per se, our own clutter, the noise, the noise on the top of the ocean. You deep dive and there's this calm, deep part of ourselves that we delve into, and that's where we catch the thoughts. And there in itself, you give birth to the intentionality. You don't go into it with this intention to create that. But then when you come out of meditation, you automatically become the better version of yourself. You've got the capacity to be able to intentionalize yourself into a space. And what I mean by that is that you're able to hear your clients better. you're able to help them hear themselves better. You're able to catch thoughts and a connection to what the project needs. So you adding more value because you're coming from a deeper sense of self, and you're creating from that deeper sense of self. So you're connecting to the requirements of a project. So it doesn't become, it's not about yourself. It is about the project and the vision and what it requires. And obviously with a 30-year history of experience and coming from this deep dive space within yourself, you do automatically add way more value, because it's an experienced value in terms of industry experience, and it's an experienced value in terms of one's own deeper realms of being.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to touch on something where you're talking about the noise. So
Yes.
there's a similarity between sensory overwhelm or kind of honing in on senses. So when you are creating a space, how do you find those right kind of nodes in order to balance your sensory environment?
I, by nature, am very sensory sensitive. I get, like, you press my red button if there's too many like apps open and too much noise around me. So for me, I feel it's one's birthright to have an environment that cushions your senses, and everybody is different. Some people, you know, can't handle the noise levels, and there's an acoustic element that one has to take in consideration when you design a space, because you're designing for all the different senses. You're not just designing for one client, particularly in commercial spaces. So again, it comes with that experienced knowledge of lights. What does a lux levels have to sit at? What can you do to reduce the noise? How does form and pattern and color affect on psychology? And so then you will design obviously within that to meet the requirements of said environment. So hospitality space is always at a spa, or is it a, you know, doesn't need to be a high energy space that encourages sales. So some spaces will automatically be designed so that it stimulates all your senses. I, by nature, love to design spaces that cushions your senses, that enhances connection, that deep dives into that sense of well-being. So the projects that I love doing will automatically call for that. So it comes from, again, that sensitivity within oneself. How do you feel? And then how do you relate that into a space and the experience of the space and the transformation of the space? So again, it's that balance between the connection you have with yourself, the connection you have with other, and then the knowledge that you bring into the experience, technicalities of what we do.
And then obviously, because there was an article that you posted recently talking about Anna-Marie Lombard's sensory intelligence as well. So especially you've spoken about in the commercial space where you have to think about different individuals. But if you were looking at a residential space, obviously you're thinking still about the people who are interacting in that home, but how would you then personalize that experience to that specific individual, from going from a multi-individual space to that.
It is, again, that connection of when you meet the client, you just connect. Well, I can't speak for how other designers work, but I connect with the client, and I listen to what is not being said, and I listen to what is also being said. And then obviously you look at the limitations of the space, and there's obviously the consideration to a budget. And then it's a process of, it really is a process of connecting to the project, to the technical requirements, and then to the client's taste. It never ever is about you as the designer. The only part that you're bringing into a delivery on a project as a designer is your experience, but it's always connecting externally to the client's tastes, their wants, their needs, the requirements. And then obviously, if you're doing spaces within an existing space, you design sensitively so that the coherence and the integration seems seamless, that it doesn't look like you've suddenly plonked this one room into a coexisting space that it doesn't, you know, have a coherent thread and feeling to it.
That makes a lot of sense. So then, with another parallel that I can think of between meditation and creating spaces that are mindful is about being in the present moment. So what do you use in terms of, again, touching on senses that helps to keep people in the present moment within a space?
Yes, that's a very good question. In a branded environment, and again, it leads to that bespoke designed elements that Xperiencemakers is known for. We don't really do a cut and paste model. It's to create a unique story that really tells the tale of that brand or that environment. And when you create through textures, colors, graphics, forms, space flow, huge part of that, where it, on a subconscious level, grounds the customer or the client, how they flow through the space on a subliminal level, how they connect with the story that you're telling within the space. It always pulls a person into the now, you know, because they're connecting with an object, and then they start thinking deeply about that, not necessarily always realizing they're doing it. That's why I love designing with such intentionality that it's not related to the commercial cut and paste model out there, because you disconnect when this. It's like you being bombarded with a whole lot of emails. After a while, you don't even read half the emails. But when something like a subject line comes at you that is so different, your brain engages because it's something fresh. And that's the kind of relationship we try and create with our environments and the bespoke type of elements that we bring into our design, so that the client cannot help but engage because it's so fresh and so different.
And then on the flip side of that, you also have the restorative side of creating just really calm spaces, which again leads to, you know, trying to create this inner calm within a meditative experience, but that you can also create a calm and restorative environment. Can you talk a little bit about that parallel?
Yeah, are you talking about holistic, spas and that kind of thing?
Well, so within a wellness space, but also just in terms of your home environment being able to help restore your inner balance.
A sense of calm. I think if I can speak from my own experience and also the experience that I have with clients in their spaces, is that, and particularly residential environments, is that, again, it's that sensitivity to the client's taste, be it eclectic, be it, you know, a little bit more modern, is to connect the environment with the palate. It's like a good wine. It's like, it's very personalized taste. And sometimes you get the holistic picture, and sometimes there's an ingredient that you need to massage a little bit or alter a little bit. As designers, we're people, and we're not always necessarily going to get like every touch point 100%, but as a business, we strive to always course correct and alter things so that at the end of the day, the client feels connected to every element, every touch point, as though they did it. You must never feel like an outside designer came and designed your space. It always needs to feel as though it's an extension of something they would have done, but you know, so they can relate to it, they can connect to it in that way.
So it's the ultra personalized experience that you're creating.
Yes, and when I design, I always come from that. I always internalize how would I feel, you know. So I'm always driving to see how can you do more to connect a client to a space that's an extension of their true essence.
And obviously your years of experience both in design and meditation help create that foundation.
100%.
So something that I was thinking about now is that, so in some realms you have the opportunity, especially if you're collaborating with like-minded architects, to create a brand new vision, and that gives you one set of challenges. So we can touch on that, but then also looking at if you then are sitting with an existing space, and maybe it is a space that, you know, an architect or somebody who, you know, a professional person has created this environment, but now you're moving into it and it's beautiful, but it doesn't totally connect with you. So how do you approach those two scenarios?
Again, it's like first and foremost, the departure is to see the flow of the space. Operationally, does it serve you know, the operations needs? Sometimes things are just disconnected, that it takes more time to get from A to B, which it's not just about the pretty picture, it's also about the practicality of how the space flows. So we always depart with, how can we reorientate in a clever way without, you know, throwing the baby out with the bathwater? Is there a clever way of reorientating? And often it's a 20% change that makes an 80% difference. So from a sound, you know, a technicality point of view, first departure. And then it is, again, the sensitivity of how can we work around the existing elements, be it furniture, be it fittings, to make the most effective changes with not necessarily throwing the most amount of money at it, you know. And then how do we appropriate the budget to yield the biggest change? So sometimes you can, with clever engineering, yield a massive result, and then you can use that budget into something else that would even beef up the experience. And often it's a surface application elements that has the most transformation. And again, you have to connect with the space to see how you're able to connect the transformation most effectively in terms of the surface application. So we've often worked with environments where we don't necessarily change the bricks and mortar that much, but we can definitely show examples where you would do the before and after picture and you cannot believe that it's the same space, just because we re-engineered it with surface application, I want to say processes, or surface application so that you have a completely new transformation experience of that space. And it's almost like coloring in a picture. You know, you just be sensitive to the environment, and again, bringing that brand personality back into the space.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that answers
you. Yes, it does. And I think that actually segues into another conversation that I'd like to have, which is around experience makers and working with heritage spaces.
Yes.
And so within that realm, you were talking now about surface applications, but obviously in a historical space, sometimes there's sensitivities around what you can do with the walls, and also just in terms of what the space itself can breathe into what you do with the creativity. So how would you say you're influenced by the storied walls within a historic space?
I love the challenge of restrictions, because it really takes your creative mind on a walk, where you challenged and to think deeply. So often with restrictions on heritage that we've experienced, particularly in Cape Town, there's a lot of heritage here. We've had a site here that the floors are 120 years old, and it's existed like that with no problem. And the minute you need to do alterations, suddenly you now have to make this whole 120-year-old floor fireproof, but you're not allowed to touch the floor. you kind of have to do flick flacks in terms of the creative side of it, to retain the authenticity of the space, because you don't want to lose that, but also to meet the requirements of health and safety. So we have to do a lot of back-end research to see how we can meet the requirements of the health and safety without having to lose the charm of the heritage elements, which for me it's the heart of the space. That's why I love history and love integrating history with contemporary, and to find that balance. So it's a research. It's a whole back-end research to see what the limitations are, and then it's a whole back-end research to see how we can technically meet those requirements. And then again, it's like seeing within those parameters what the client's operation requires. So which walls you're allowed to move and which walls you're not, and how do you brace them, and how would you expose elements within that, the limitations, to make it a little bit more industrial, make it more modern. And then what would the furniture design within that be? That's an easy element. It's more the structural elements that we often have to engineer and see again with the surface application, structural elements, how are we going to balance that experience of the space, and to breathe new life into it, transform it in such a way, but to allow the history to tell its stories, and the new story that we're layering into the space of the new brand.
It's obvious from looking at Xperiencemakers' portfolio that there is this love of heritage. You can see it from one space to another. Was there a particular project that got you into it, or was it something that you kind of sought out?
No, it's an organic, I think, design over the years, you become clear on who you are and what the value is that you're able to bring. When you start out in your career, you take on all the commercial jobs, the corporate jobs, and as much as I appreciate that design and the fact that I had that history, and have the experience of it, the commercial side of design within spaces that has a longevity. I remember this wine farmer once said he loves old because old can never get old, and I thought I'm gonna claim that line, because it's so poignant to being sensitive to our history and then driving it forwards and not losing where we come from. So it's been an evolution, and the Heritage Project actually found me initially, and then it's working within the realms of very commercialized, almost clinical environments, and then juxtapositioning yourself into the experience of heritage, and you just fall in love with it. Well, I fell in love with it as time went by.
No, that I think it is something. It's almost like when you discover your love language.
Exactly, 100%. So I don't negate the value of commercial design. I just personally love the challenge of history with the future, and how to merge these two elements and be sensitive to both.
So, having mentioned that there are quite a few of these projects, is there one that stands out to you, or a story that you'd like to share of some like something that meaningful that came through the project, or that you discovered, something that really just stands out to you from a space?
I don't know why, but I just remember one stressful experience was with Heritage, where what stood out for me is never ever go on the client's green light. You wait for the Heritage to give you the green light. And we had an experience where we had started this Heritage project on the client's green light, but the Heritage hadn't quite, I mean, the plans were in council, and then we got the stop works order. Fortunately, we had all our T's crossed and I's dotted, but the mileage it took off my life. It taught me the lesson never ever to proceed with a project until council is, or the heritage body has actually given you the green light. So yes, that was a experiential knowledge of how not to mess with heritage. In terms of the experience of heritage, each project is so unique that there's always, you never stop learning as a designer. You think you've learned, never, ever. Every project you learn something new on. So I can't really say that there's a standout from one project to the next, because there's always technical things that you learn. And then each project has its own personality that you create. That there's an amazing journey on each and every one of them.
Okay, no, that does answer it, because I think, you know, there's sometimes it's like maybe choosing between the favorite between your children.
Exactly, 100%. Yes, yes.
So you've spoken a little bit about with having to think about when you've got an historic building and you're adapting it to a modern use. Is there maybe something further that you'd like to elaborate on what kind of guides you in terms of striking that balance between those two elements?
That's a very good question. I think it's just experience, you know, it's again the years of experience that I have within the design field, and then it's the experience of a client, it's experiencing their needs and then designing into that, and then the sensitivity to the space. So design is really a craft that you hone over years and years and years. It's like a layered, it's that terroir that you develop with a good wine, you know. I can't say that there's a cut and paste recipe. Every space yields its own calling, and you as the designer become the vessel through which this creativity is channeled. So there isn't a straight answer on that. No. It's a sense of knowing when you design into an environment what it needs. It's ingredients that it's like making a stew. It has to percolate, and that's why I like slow design. You can't yield the best longevity out of a space if you don't slowly design into it and breathe life into it. And it's a collaborative process between yourself, the client, yourself, the space, yourself, the team. And it literally is a slow, it's always lovely to see from the beginning to the end how things evolve and which elements actually evolve. It's predicted.
So I think, so you can start with one particular thread, but that
Yes.
will have its own evolution.
Absolutely. You have a great intentions with our departure that we have is the creative audit. So you have this intention, the vision. And you create that, and then within that it starts taking a life of its own. So I love creativity, so I love consciousness. All of it, it's just it grows. It's like the universe, it expands and it contracts and expands and contracts. And so when we design, we it's the same organism that parts of it wants to expand and other parts doesn't want to. And so it's a living, breathing evolution until it's actually in real life. There it is. You've created this, not just me. It literally is the whole team. It's the team of the client. It's a team with the contract. It's a team with our own team. And I marvel in it time and again. We start with nothing, and then you've given birth to this three-dimensional creation.
I think that's also, if you've been in the industry for a while, you've had to adapt from seeing something in 2D emerge into 3D versus having the visual renders and things, which are great within their own realm, but that ability to be able to go from that 2D to 3D experience, it is almost like a magic trick.
Yeah, and I think that we, the more seasoned designers, with respect, we've had to learn to think 3D. So you've developed that critical thinking of how is this thing going to construct? How is it going to solve X, Y, Z? The software today is fantastic. The AI is fantastic. It really beefs up our productivity, but it doesn't solve the critical thinking. So I think it should be a supplement, but it shouldn't be the solution.
Mm.
You've got to have the intention and the clarity of where this thing is going. You can't, and I think a lot of the times from experience, I see that the 3D becomes the solution, and you can just see the layers of incongruence and disconnect. You have to connect with the essence of the foundation and then build up from that.
Yeah, I've seen horror stories where doors will just open into nothing, and because it hasn't been, you look at things as a little play model versus thinking through the structured layers. And I think even in your discussion of that mix of history and modern, is that it also over time becomes a sixth sense of how the space and how things need to work together.
100%. As I said in the beginning, I think you unconsciously incompetent, and then you become consciously incompetent, and then you move into an unconscious competence where it's second nature. It's like waking up and breathing. It's like I can't start my day without my hour and a half program to set my day. It's the same thing. You just have this relationship with the space where you connect with it. You just know what it means. You can't explain it. It's just, particularly on the space flow, I love it. It's like a puzzle that it literally is a relationship that you have with your space, your environment.
So to circle back on to meditation, and you've been speaking now about energies and flows, can you speak on how, with meditation or with energy work, you're looking at the alignment of energy within your space, how you translate that into a physical environment?
So our skin is our first protection layer, and then we've got our environments, which is our second protection layer, and everything actually works on energy nodes. We all know now that quantum physics and energy, or not all, but a lot of people are aware of our chakras, and we've got these energy centers in our body, and the structure has a similar effect. If you look at Vastu architecture, those buildings were designed so that it could withstand the test of time. And there's always a Brahmasthan, which is the central energy point to a building. And you can feel the physical, palpable difference in a building that's designed with that sensitivity to its energy, just like you can feel the physical difference when your body's energy nodes are aligned or out of alignment. So I'm incredibly sensitive to my own body's alignment. So I'm by nature sensitive to the alignment within environments for myself. And I feel that serves my work better.
Okay, so we've looked at in heritage buildings that there's obviously a sensitivity to the space, but in terms of mindful design in general, can you speak in terms of sustainability, what you see as sustainability? Obviously, there's eco levels to it, but are there other touch points to sustainability?
Well, from my experience, I've seen that the sustainable sites or installations that we've done are always the ones that has more of a bespoke element to it. Whether it's that you use the artisanal value that that you use to craft these ideas as a designer, because it develops a patina that has a timelessness to it. And again, coming back to the intentional design, intentionality carries the seed of longevity. If we look at anything historic, it has a beauty to it that is timeless. Anything that is instant, that is fast, it's like what comes to mind are these little sparkles that you put on the top of a cake, and the fuse blows out very quickly. Whereas if you're thinking of like a long wick candle, think of an old-fashioned candle and how long that burns for. So everything in my experience of life, in terms of my inner world experience and the outer world experience, that we've created spaces where the client has invested the time, energy, and finances and resources to develop an environment. The time span of those environments outlive commercial space, and when I'm saying fast-paced commercial space or fast design commercial space, threefold. I can confidently say that. So for me, yes, there's the typical, we know all the technical jargon and design that we have to do in terms of sustainability, in terms of the environment, but I'm talking about a sustainability in terms of a craft. There's nothing like craftsmanship, whether it is from the intentional design stage right through to the actual execution of using artisans to execute the ideas.
And I think maybe that's also where, in terms of the way that Experience Makers blends old and new, is that even the new that is blended in, it's always something that has handcrafted, artisanal. It's not a, and that you can't get something that's off the shelf that doesn't have, certain craftsmanship to it, depending on where you're sourcing it from. But if there's, where possible, a new element is created for that space.
It's created to integrate again, that it doesn't look like there's two ingredients. It's like a coffee bean floating on a pot of water, whereas, you mill the coffee and then you infuse it and you percolate it. That's the craft between the two elements. And I think it's that sensitivity of the fusion. And also it takes a certain art to curate the bespoke antiques into a space. It's not just a cut and paste model once again. There's got to be this relationship to the vision to curate things in a way that it looks like it's matter-of-factly always existed together, coexisted together.
And so with that, you're looking at different, I suppose, elements and bodies that come together to create that. So when working on certain extensive projects, you've got the architect, you've got you as the interior architect and designer, you've got your craftsman, and obviously, with heritage, there's, possibly even a specialist heritage consultant. So how does that interplay work together?
So very good question. As a younger designer, years back, you're thrown into the mix of relationships, and relationships, everything is relationships. You have a relationship with your staff, you have a relationship with your client, you have a relationship with your teams, external teams, and your suppliers and manufacturers. So as the years have passed, I've realized how intrinsically valuable it is to have relationships across the board where everybody shares values, visions. So you can't coexist two different languages inside a space. It doesn't yield for the reciprocant or the people who's experiencing the space, or customers experiencing the space, even the staff experiencing the space, to understand the language if there's 3, 4, 5 different languages happening. So I think the co-creation of any built environment, the team needs to be on the same space, or the same space as well, same page when it comes to shared values and shared visions and shared intentions. Intentionality leads all of it. The client, us, the architect, the engineers, everybody's got to share that passionate intention and goal to create that yielded long-term vision.
So you touched base earlier, you mentioned the creative audit process. So now looking at, that collaborative process, how does the creative audit kind of form within that scenario?
The creative audit was a process, of just unpacking again years and years of experience, and then seeing where the gaps lie within one's own language to the onboarding of a client and creating the vision for a project. So it was a slow birthing process, this creative audit. That's our process that we follow. And it has taken on a life of its own, and it's become its own standalone entity to our service provision, because we've seen how 99.99% of the time, nobody really knows where they're going. and nobody knows what the budget should be. And so what you wish for and what you can actually afford. So we've married and fused this embodied experience of seeing what the client's needs are and how can we serve that, so that there's a strategic engagement process and potentially also an exit point for the client to have this wonderful a process of departure where it creates a vision for all team players. We've actually onboarded with architects where they then see the value of the creative audit and say, well, maybe you should meet with the client first, create the vision. Or we've had a client who's on board with the architect and seen our creative audit and said, well, actually, we need that before we actually engage with the architect, because the creative audit is the foundational level. And I'm personally very passionate about it because it creates the high level vision where it really engages all the touch points. It's not just about architecture or not about design. It's about the futuristic vision of the entire project and all the moving parts, from marketing to growth markets to architecture to design to all of it. Then there's this foundation, and then everybody knows where they stand and everybody is inspired in the same way. So the client, their team, the architect gets the vision. We know what we're designing towards. We know what budget limitations, and then there's the strategic approach to deciding, okay, which parts of the project will yield a quicker turnaround, because everything is also about money and commerce. So how can we yield turnover in which areas? So we, focus our attention on developing that part of the project first, and then there's always this vision that you're aiming at and that you're working towards. So yes, it's been a very successful part of our process that, as I say, has become its own standalone entity that serves every project wonderfully.
And it allows you to build a foundation of trust with all parties so that you're all on the same page.
Yes, so often in the history of my business, you go off on a tangent and the client doesn't necessarily have the budget, but everybody hides behind the ability to be honest and say, listen, I've only got this amount of money to do this, or I don't want to overcapitalize, I don't want to spend on this. But this departure process really forms the relationship of communication where there's this authentic template or authentic foundation, as you said, to be able to say, well, listen, this is an overshoot, let's hone back on the design and let's maybe just focus on this. And then once we've established turnover and revenue on this, we can move on to the next. But we're so inspired by this vision that we now know what we're moving towards. More people than not, more clients than not, have actually feel overwhelmed by what they don't know they're dealing with. So we come with this experience, knowledge, where we kind of become our own QSs, but we QSs with a creative QS vision to it, versus just the bricks and mortar.
And also with building that foundation is you're also looking at just creating a North Star as a project vision. So as you're making decisions along the way, it can always come back to that.
Exactly. And also refine, sometimes you develop the one leg of the operation and then it morphs into something else. Everything in life is a morphing process. It's like an amoeba that shapeshifts, and so nothing is a fixed target. But we found that with this vision, it just is way more productive. Way more productive. It's almost like having that foundation, when you have to study for an exam and you go and clean out your closets and you're deflecting and you're not really getting your footing, you're always on quicksand. This gives it a solid foundation that you can then build onto and have target dates and deliverables.
Yeah, because also, I mean, even going back on budget, is that even when you there is definitely a budget that's been allocated. There is there's maybe a large budget that's allocated to a project. You still want to make sure that you're using it to the maximum of what it's capable of, and making sure that everybody, you're investing in certain pieces from the get-go.
100%. 100%. It's always massaging the budget to see where it's going to yield the best results, whether it is an experiential result for the customer, because that's return business, you know. People go on a feeling that you create. So the customer wants to have that feeling, and that's a compelling feeling enough for them to want to come back. But at the same token, the business operator needs to make money. So it's, how can you balance those two elements? How can you give this project what it needs, and how can you give the experience that it needs, in terms of revenue and experience, and how, where to position these. So again, it's one of the business components to design that lights me up. I love to see results. It's not just about the creativity. It's about creativity straddles not just the design. Creativity straddles the money, the commerce side of it as well, because money is also creativity, you know. So when we see a success in a project, an experiential success where the participants or the staff enjoys the environment, but we also hear that the revenue's gone up 20-30% from, you know, the day that they open the new doors. It's incredibly fulfilling as a designer.
And in the same way, even, you know, if you're working in a residential space, you know, yes, you're going to be living in that space for a certain period of time, but, you know, we're humans, we're transient, we don't live forever. So you want to know that if you are selling it or passing it on, that there's also a sound investment in what you're doing.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, and I can also say the youngest version of me would have probably been more gung-ho and seeing this vision come to fruition. I would far rather talk myself out of work with a client, and know that I am authentic in, because I also have I have an experienced sense of, is this thing going to be worthwhile for the client? And I've often advised clients, I don't think you should go down this path, because there's a greater picture at hand. For me, it's the whole long. It's not just about the instant gratification of seeing your creative thing. It's the ego thing, that seeing your creativity expressed in the way that you want to express it, or to just tick this project off your list because, you know, you want to make money. It's not that. It's always the greater vision in mind of, has this thing got sustainability? Now, there's another example of sustainability. Is, have I added the value to advise the client in a way that is really authentic to my experience of design and commerce? And do I know that this is sustainable in terms of what, you know, at the end of the day, we're not just designers. We're there to also add value in terms of the commerce, as you said. Then you need to have a return on your investment, whether it's an existing operation that needs to make money, or if it is that they are able to sell that property at a profit by the time they're ready to leave it.
So thank you for the time for having this conversation about these matters that are close to your design heart, and that brings these kind of visions out into the world. I think it's important to, you know, there's a copy and paste way of doing design, or there's a way of, you know, this is my voice or my idea, but I think there's a different intentionality when you're using a concept that runs through versus a, you know, if I see this particular chair, I know it's a Xperiencemakers space.
Yes, thank you. No, I loved having these questions asked, because it helps me deep dive into my 25 years, and it's so embodied that yeah, it's when these questions are thrown at you that you just realize actually what a love relationship you have with design and creativity, whether it's meditation, creativity, whether it's you know, bringing ideas to life. It's all part of the same, you know, it's the yin and yang, it's the inner and outer, it's the same as, you know, the container and the vessel, it's all part of the same. So thank you for asking these questions, these thought-provoking questions.